And look, I think there is a reason she got up in Sophie's face. And I don't think there was any need to sort of bow up to Sophie like that. I don't think, and to Sophie's credit, she did not back down at all. So
it was supposed to be a night of pure celebration, the kind of moment athletes dream about, the kind of highlight fans replay for years. The Indiana Fever had just pulled off a playoff victory that almost nobody saw coming. A gritty, emotional win that should have been remembered for resilience, teamwork, and joy. The arena was electric. Fans were on their feet, players were crying and hugging, and even the injured teammates on the bench were living every second as if they'd been on the court themselves. But in the middle of all that joy, something strange and honestly ridiculous happened. Instead of the spotlight staying on the Fever's triumph, the cameras caught a completely different story. A story that had nothing to do with basketball and everything to do with how one player was treated in a moment where she should have been celebrating with her team. That player was Sophie Cunningham. And if you know Sophie, you know she's never been one to back down, never been afraid to show passion, never been scared of what people might say about her. But this time, she wasn't even playing. She was injured, sitting on the sidelines in a massive leg brace, doing what any loyal teammate would do, cheering as loudly and passionately as she could. That should have been the end of it. Just another injured player refusing to let a setback steal her team's spirit. Instead, it became the spark that lit a firestorm. Out of nowhere, a league security guard made their way towards Sophie, not to join the celebration, not even to calmly remind her of some technical rule, but to confront her publicly, aggressively, right in the middle of the Fever's biggest moment of the season. And here's the part that fans can't stop talking about. Why Sophie? Why was she singled out when her teammates, including stars like Caitlin Clark, were standing right there celebrating too? Why did it feel less like a security measure and more like a personal attack? What happened next would take this one awkward encounter and explode it into a viral controversy. Within minutes, the clip of Sophie being confronted was everywhere online, spreading faster than highlights of the actual game. Hashtags started trending, memes started flying, and the conversation shifted from the Fever's victory to whether the WNBA had just exposed one of its ugliest double standards on the biggest stage. So tonight, we're not just talking about a playoff win. We're diving into how a celebration turned into a scandal, how one player became the center of unwanted drama, and why so many fans believe Sophie Cunningham isn't just being criticized, she's being targeted. The atmosphere inside the arena that night was nothing short of electric. This wasn't just another game, it was survival. The Indiana Fever had entered the playoffs with their backs against the wall, missing their generational star Caitlin Clark due to injury. Most analysts had already written them off. And yet, through grit and sheer determination, the Fever pulled off the impossible. The final buzzer sounded, and the underdogs had secured a hard-fought playoff advancement that sent shockwaves across the league. For the players, this was more than a win. It was validation. Every ounce of sweat, every sacrifice, every brutal practice had led to this moment. The crowd erupted, the players embraced, and the energy inside the building felt like it could lift the roof off. Even those who weren't on the court that night were swept into the wave of emotion. Among them was Sophie Cunningham. With her season cut short by a serious leg injury, she had been forced into a new role: supporter, motivator, emotional backbone. She wasn't hitting clutch shots or locking down defenders, but she was still very much a part of this victory. Anyone watching could see it. Sophie stood on the sidelines in her leg brace, her voice hoarse from cheering, her hands flying into the air as her teammates sealed the win. She wasn't just watching the game, she was living it. It was a pure, unfiltered moment of joy. Exactly the kind of celebration fans want to see. Nothing controversial, nothing out of line. Just a team, together, savoring something special. But almost instantly, that picture-perfect scene began to unravel. Instead of the cameras staying locked on the jubilation, they caught something unexpected. Movement from the sidelines that didn't come from a player or a coach. but from a league security guard. While the Fever players were still celebrating, this guard began striding with purpose directly towards Sophie Cunningham. What happened next was jarring. In the middle of the Fever's greatest moment of the season, Sophie suddenly found herself face to face with confrontation. The very act of cheering for her team while stuck in a heavy brace that made even walking difficult was treated as if she were breaking some invisible rule. And in that single bizarre decision, the narrative of the night changed. What should have been remembered as the Fever's crowning moment was shattered by confusion, hostility, and the beginning of a controversy that would overshadow everything else. What happened next felt so out of place, so disproportionate, that fans couldn't believe what they were seeing. In a moment when the Fever should have been basking in their victory, Sophie Cunningham suddenly became the target of a confrontation that looked more like a scene from a police drama than a playoff celebration. The league security guard didn't approach calmly. They didn't pull Sophie aside for a quiet word. Instead, they moved with a kind of authority that instantly shifted the mood from celebration to conflict. Cameras caught the guard leaning in close to Sophie, their posture aggressive, their voice raised. And for what? Sophie wasn't charging the court. She wasn't interfering with play. She was standing near the half-court line on the sideline, exactly where injured players often gather when the final whistle blows. The absurdity of the situation became even clearer when you looked at Sophie herself. A bulky leg brace locked around her knee, limited mobility, completely incapable of sprinting onto the floor even if she had wanted to. The very idea that she posed some kind of risk was laughable, and yet the confrontation escalated as if she were some kind of intruder. Sophie's reaction told its own story. At first, confusion, her face registering the disbelief of someone asking, "Wait, is this really happening right now?" That confusion hardened into frustration, then into the defiant look fans have come to know so well. Sophie has built a reputation on standing her ground, and this was no different. She refused to shrink back. She refused to let the aggressive body language intimidate her. But by then, the damage was done. The Fever's biggest moment of joy had been hijacked. Instead of shots of players hugging and celebrating, the broadcast feeds and fan clips were now capturing Sophie being scolded like a misbehaving child. It wasn't just bad optics, it was a public embarrassment. And the irony couldn't be ignored. The problem wasn't Sophie. The real disruption came from the guard, whose actions created a spectacle that instantly overshadowed the victory itself. What should have been a quick, forgettable celebration had now transformed into the seed of a viral controversy. Because fans watching at home, they weren't going to let this slide. They were already pulling out their phones, clipping the footage, and asking the same burning question. Why Sophie? It didn't take long, minutes, maybe even seconds, before the clip of Sophie's confrontation started making the rounds online. At first, it was just a few shaky phone videos posted by fans who happened to be courtside. But in the age of instant sharing, that's all it takes. By the time the Fever players had finished their locker room celebrations, Sophie Cunningham was already trending. The reaction was swift and brutal. Fans weren't confused. They weren't asking for clarification. They were furious. Comment after comment blasted the WNBA, accusing the league of manufacturing drama out of thin air. One post summed it up perfectly. She's in a brace, she can barely walk, and this is who security decides to check. Give me a break. Memes exploded across timelines. Some compared the guard to a mall cop on a power trip. Others layered dramatic movie music over the footage, mocking how exaggerated the confrontation looked compared to what Sophie was actually doing, standing still, clapping, cheering. Within hours, hashtags like Free Sophie and WNBA Exposed were climbing the charts. But this wasn't just internet humor. There was real outrage behind the jokes. Fans felt something deeper, that this wasn't a one-off mistake, but another example of Sophie Cunningham being treated differently. It wasn't just that she got yelled at. It was that her teammates standing right beside her, Caitlin Clark and Chloe Buby, celebrated in the same way and were completely ignored. That double standard stung. The conversation spread fast, spilling over from basketball Twitter into mainstream sports talk. Commentators debated it, YouTube creators clipped it, and fans who normally wouldn't pay attention to the WNBA suddenly had opinions. And here's the kicker. The Fever's playoff victory, the actual basketball story, was already buried. Instead, the headline became Sophie Cunningham versus the WNBA. And when the public feels like a player is being unfairly singled out, that outrage doesn't die down, it multiplies. Fans started digging deeper, looking back at Sophie's past, connecting the dots to a pattern they felt they'd seen before. But was this really just one bad decision by an overzealous guard? Or was Sophie Cunningham being deliberately targeted? To understand why this moment blew up the way it did, you have to look at the bigger picture. Sophie Cunningham has never been just another player in the WNBA. From the very beginning of her career, she's carried an energy that you either love or hate. There's no middle ground. She's fiery, outspoken, and unapologetically herself. That confidence, that refusal to tone it down for anyone, has made her one of the most polarizing figures in the league. The media, and sometimes even the league itself, have leaned into casting her as a kind of villain. Highlight reels often cut to Sophie's scowls, her trash talk, her physical style of play. And while other players are praised for their competitive fire, Sophie often gets slapped with words like dirty, entitled, or out of control. It's the same behavior, but the framing is completely different. Think about it. When players like Angel Reese or Natasha Cloud get in someone's face, the narrative is about passion and leadership. When Sophie does it, suddenly it's a problem. Suddenly she's too much. The double standard is hard to ignore, and fans have been pointing it out for years. And here's the thing. Sophie leans into it. She doesn't hide from the image. If people want to see her as the league's villain, she'll embrace it. Because at the end of the day, villains get attention. They get clicks. They move the conversation. That defiance, that "I won't change for you" attitude, is exactly why she has one of the most loyal fan bases in women's basketball. But it's also why nights like this sting more. Because when league staff single her out in a moment where she did nothing wrong, fans don't see it as random. They see it as confirmation. They see it as the WNBA itself buying into the narrative it helped create, that Sophie Cunningham is the problem child who always needs to be checked, even when she's literally in a leg brace cheering from the sidelines. And that's why this confrontation hit so hard online. It wasn't just about Sophie getting yelled at. It was about everything that came before it. Years of being painted as the villain. Years of different standards. Years of being treated as if her confidence was something dangerous, instead of something the league should embrace.
The more fans replayed the clip, the clearer the pattern looked. And the louder the question became. If Caitlin Clark or another league-favored star had done the exact same thing, would security have dared to step in? Once the initial outrage died down just enough for people to start analyzing what actually happened, fans began pulling receipts. They weren't just re-watching Sophie's clip, they were comparing it to everything around her. And what they found made the confrontation look even worse. In the same celebration, just feet away, Caitlin Clark and Chloe Biebe were standing shoulder to shoulder with Sophie. They were clapping, cheering, moving on to the sideline near half court, the exact same thing Sophie was doing. But here's the difference. Not a single guard walked up to them. No one raised their voice. No one treated them as a threat. Only Sophie. That detail became the smoking gun. Fans plastered side-by-side screenshots across social media. On one side, Caitlin and Chloe celebrating freely. On the other, Sophie being confronted like she'd just broken a rule. The contrast was so blatant that even people who weren't Sophie fans had to admit something felt off. Comment sections turned into forums of outrage. Some fans said the treatment was personal, that Sophie's reputation as the villain made her an easy target. Others speculated that the league is more protective of players like Clark, who represents the face of its marketing push, while players like Sophie are seen as expendable. The exact motivations were debated, But the double standard itself was undeniable. And the hypocrisy was glaring when you compared it to how the league frames other stars. When Angel Reese gets animated on the bench, it's charisma. When Natasha Cloud storms the court in support of a teammate, it's leadership. But Sophie Cunningham? Somehow the same behavior becomes a security risk. This wasn't just an isolated overreaction, it felt like part of a pattern. Fans pointed out that whenever Sophie's involved in an on-court spat, she's often portrayed as the aggressor, even if she's retaliating. And now, in a playoff celebration, she was once again the only one singled out. To make matters worse, Sophie's composure in the face of the confrontation only highlighted the absurdity. She didn't lash out, didn't escalate, didn't lose control. She simply stood her ground and stared down the guard, her body language saying more than words ever could. "I'm not backing down." But by then, the damage was already spreading. The Fever's playoff run had been hijacked by a controversy the league itself created. And instead of being remembered for their grit, the night was now a case study in double standards. And if there's one thing fans can't stand, it's hypocrisy. By the next morning, the conversation had grown far beyond Sophie Cunningham. What started as a single viral clip had snowballed into a referendum on the WNBA itself. Fans weren't just upset about how Sophie was treated. They were calling out the league's entire approach to its players, its image, and its priorities. Social media timelines were flooded with posts hammering the same theme. This wasn't about enforcing rules, it was about optics, and the optics were terrible. One fan wrote, "The WNBA wants respect, but then they pull stunts like this. You can't demand to be taken seriously while treating your own players like criminals." That sentiment got thousands of likes and reposts. Others went after the league's leadership directly. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert's name was dragged into trending hashtags, with fans accusing her of presiding over a league that seemed more interested in controlling players than celebrating them. Some even called for her resignation, pointing out that every time the WNBA has a chance to shine in the spotlight, it somehow manages to trip over its own feet. And the frustration wasn't limited to Sophie's fan base. Neutral fans, even casual viewers drawn in by Caitlin Clark's star power, were shaking their heads. To them, the confrontation looked less like enforcing a boundary and more like pettiness on display. For a league fighting to grow its audience, this was the worst possible look. Meanwhile, the insults aimed at the security guard were relentless. Commenters mocked them as a mall cop on a power trip and a walking PR disaster. Harsh? Absolutely. But it captured the public mood. People weren't just annoyed, they felt embarrassed for the league. Instead of headlines celebrating the Fever's playoff grit, the internet was filled with memes about security guards trying to stop an injured player from clapping too hard. That's why this backlash hit so hard. Fans weren't just angry, they felt betrayed. They tuned in to see basketball, not league-manufactured drama. They wanted to celebrate a team's triumph, not argue about why one of its most passionate players was treated like a nuisance. And the more the league stayed silent, the louder the backlash became. What should have been a playoff celebration was now a PR disaster, and fans made it clear they weren't going to let this one slide. The fallout from this incident wasn't just about Sophie Cunningham. It struck at something deeper, the perception of the entire WNBA. And perception in sports is everything.
For years, the league has worked tirelessly to convince casual fans, sponsors, and media outlets that women's basketball deserves the same respect and visibility as men's sports. With stars like Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, and Paige Buckers pulling in record-breaking attention, the WNBA was finally starting to feel like it had momentum on its side. New fans were tuning in, ratings were climbing, the stage was set for growth. But then came this moment. A playoff celebration, supposed to be one of the league's shining highlights, was hijacked by a security guard berating an injured player. And the image that stuck wasn't joy, resilience, or triumph. It was dysfunction. It was pettiness.
It was the league turning a celebration into a scandal. For casual viewers, this was devastating. Imagine someone flipping on the game because they'd heard all the buzz about Caitlin Clark and the Fever. Instead of watching a fun, feel-good story unfold, they're watching a player in a leg brace get treated like a threat for cheering too loudly. That doesn't scream professionalism, it screams chaos. And chaos is the last thing a growing league can afford. The damage went beyond optics. Fans began asking uncomfortable questions. Why does the league seem to play favorites with certain stars while targeting others? Why are moments of passion celebrated in some players but punished in others? And why, at a time when the WNBA needs every ounce of positive momentum, does it keep manufacturing its own controversies? For many, Sophie's confrontation felt like a symptom of a bigger issue, a league that doesn't know how to handle its own star power. Instead of embracing outspoken personalities like Sophie, who generate headlines, trend online, and rally massive fan bases, the league seems more interested in controlling them. Instead of letting players be themselves, it tries to mold them into safe, marketable archetypes. And in the process, it alienates both players and fans. This is where the stakes get dangerous, because fans notice double standards. They notice when one player is celebrated for fiery competitiveness, while another is labeled a problem. And over time, that perception becomes reality. If people start to believe the league is petty, biased, or incapable of managing its stars, they'll stop investing, they'll tune out, and no amount of sponsorship deals or marketing campaigns will bring them back. The Sophie Cunningham incident wasn't just a viral moment. It was a warning sign, a reminder that while the WNBA has the talent and the attention to grow, it also has a habit of undermining itself at the worst possible times. And unless something changes, this won't be remembered as the Fever's playoff breakthrough. It'll be remembered as yet another example of the WNBA tripping over its own feet while its stars pay the price. At the end of the day, Sophie Cunningham's only crime was caring too much about her team. She wasn't on the court, she wasn't breaking any rules, she wasn't even capable of rushing onto the floor if she wanted to. Her leg brace made sure of that. And yet, in a moment that should have been defined by joy, she was treated like a threat. That's the part fans can't get over. Because this wasn't just about Sophie, it was about what the confrontation represented. A league desperate for respect managed to turn one of its best playoff storylines into a viral embarrassment. Instead of celebrating the Fever's resilience, the conversation became about double standards, pettiness, and whether the WNBA even knows how to handle its own stars. And here's the irony. Sophie walked away from the incident stronger than ever. Her composure, her defiance, and her refusal to back down only solidified the loyalty of her fan base. Every time the league seems to push against her, her supporters rally harder. She trends more, she commands more attention, she becomes, whether the league likes it or not, one of its most impactful players. But for the WNBA, the implications are far darker. Because fans are watching, sponsors are watching, casual viewers, the exact audience the league is desperate to win over, are watching. And what they're seeing isn't growth, professionalism, or progress. They're seeing dysfunction. They're seeing a league that seems to treat passion as a problem, and individuality as something to be punished. If the WNBA truly wants to grow, it has to decide, will it embrace the stars that generate conversation, or will it keep sabotaging itself in moments that should have been victories? Because the truth is simple. Fans won't forget this. They've already made their verdict clear. Sophie Cunningham wasn't the villain that night. She was the victim of a system that can't seem to get out of its own way. And until the league learns that treating its most passionate players as enemies is a losing strategy, it will keep facing the same question after every controversy. Is the WNBA growing, or is it just getting in its own way?